Good morning, class. Today we are going to see the last chapter of the study of compounds, that is sulfuric acid. In our previous classes, we discussed about ammonia, hydrochloric acid, then after that, nitric acid in the previous class. Now, today we'll discuss about sulfuric acid. So, in sulfuric acid, we'll learn about the manufacture of sulfuric acid by contact process. After that, we'll see the different chemical reactions, important chemical reactions of sulfuric acid. So, as sulfuric acid, the molecular formula is H2SO4 and the molecular mass is 98 and the structure is as shown like this. Now, manufacture of sulfuric acid is done by a contact process. In this, we have got a different steps involved. The first step is formation of sulfur dioxide. So when sulfur is treated with oxygen, it forms sulfur dioxide, or when ferrous sulfide is treated with oxygen, it forms ferrous oxide and sulfur dioxide. Now this sulfur dioxide that is formed is converted to sulfur trioxide, conversion of purified sulfur dioxide to sulfur trioxide, and this can be done by treating sulfur dioxide with oxygen in presence of vanadium oxide in presence of platinum at temperature of 400 to 450 degrees Celsius to form sulfur trioxide, and conversion of sulfur trioxide into oleum. After that, the next step involved is the sulfur trioxide that is formed is converted into oleum. So this is done by treating sulfur trioxide with the sulfuric acid only. Okay, so for the preparation of sulfuric acid, we are using sulfuric acid and it will form an oleum, H2S2O7. Now this oleum on dilution, that means when we add water, it will form a pure sulfuric acid, H2SO4. This is known as contact process for the manufacture of sulfuric acid. Now we'll see the chemical reactions. The first reaction that we are going to see is reaction with metals. What happens when sulfuric acid reacts with metals? So this is the general equation. When metal react with acid, it form metal sulfate and hydrogen. Say for example, magnesium reacts with sulfuric acid to form magnesium sulfate and hydrogen. Zinc reacts with sulfuric acid to form zinc sulfate and hydrogen. Iron reacts with sulfuric acid to form ferrous sulfate and hydrogen. So you need to remember the general equation. These reactions you can understand. Next is chemical reactions with metal oxide and metal hydroxide. So what happens when sulfuric acid reacts with metal oxide and metal hydroxide? So base or alkali reacts with acid to form salt and water. So copper oxide and sulfuric acid, it will form salt, copper sulfate and water. Sodium hydroxide and sulfuric acid, it will form sodium bisulfate and water. And if you take excess of sodium hydroxide, it will form sodium sulfate and water. Similarly, iron oxide reacts with sulfuric acid to form ferrous sulfate and water. Now this we can also call it as a neutralization reaction. When a base react with an acid, salt and water is produced. Next, reaction with metal carbonate and metal bicarbonate. So if you have got a metal carbonate or bicarbonate, when reacted with acid, it forms salt, water and carbon dioxide. So say for example, if you take sodium carbonate and react with sulfuric acid, it will form salt, sodium sulfate, water and carbon dioxide. And if you take bicarbonate and react with sulfuric acid, it will form sodium sulfate, water and carbon dioxide. Similarly, the reaction with metal sulfide and metal sulfide. So when sulfide or bisulfide react with acid, it forms salt, water and sulfur dioxide. So sodium sulfide reacts with sulfuric acid to form sodium sulfate, water and sulfur dioxide. And sodium bisulfide reacts with sulfuric acid to form sodium sulfate, water and sulfur dioxide. And when you take a metal sulfide, say for example sodium sulfide, and reacts with sulfuric acid, it will form salt, sodium sulfate and H2S gas. And if you take FeS, that is iron sulfide with sulfuric acid, it will form FeSO4 and H2S. H2S is a hydrogen sulfide gas which has got a rotten egg smell. Next, concentrated sulfuric acid acts as an oxidizing agent. Okay, it is a good oxidizing agent, and this can be shown by these two reactions: oxidation of carbon and sulfur. If you take a carbon compound and reacts with sulfuric acid, it forms carbon dioxide, water and sulfur dioxide. And next, if you have got sulfur, it reacts with sulfuric acid to form sulfur dioxide and water. Okay. This is the reaction of oxidation of carbon and sulfur with sulfuric acid. Next, concentrated sulfuric acid also acts as a dehydrating agent. It has got a dehydrating property. That means it has got the ability to remove the water molecule from a compound. Dehydration of sugar and copper sulfate crystals. Say for example, if you take a sugar, cane sugar, the molecular formula is C12H22O11. When you treat it with sulfuric acid, it will form a sugar charcoal and water is eliminated. Similarly, if you have got a copper sulfate crystals, that is copper sulfate pentahydrated, and reacts with sulfuric acid, it forms copper sulfate and water. Copper sulfate which has got a dirty white solid. Next, non-volatile nature of sulfuric acid. Salt of volatile acid plus acid, giving you acid, salt and volatile acid. So how we can show the non-volatile nature of sulfuric acid? Say for example, if you take sodium chloride and reacts with sulfuric acid, it will form sodium bisulfate and HCl. And if you take potassium chloride and reacts with sulfuric acid, it forms potassium bisulfate and HCl. Next, potassium nitrate reacts with sulfuric acid to form potassium bisulfate and nitric acid. Similarly, if you take sodium acetate, react with sulfuric acid, it will form sodium bisulfate and acetic acid. Now, assignment for today, assignment number 8. Question number 1, mention the steps and equation involved in the contact process for the manufacture of sulfuric acid. Question number 2, give the equation for number 1, heat on sulfur with concentrated sulfuric acid and reaction of sugar with concentrated sulfuric acid. Question number 3, name the gas produced on reaction of dilute sulfuric acid with the metallic sulfide. And lastly, question number 4 is state 1 appropriate observations when concentrated sulfuric acid is added to a crystal of hydrated copper sulfate. So complete this assignment and send it in my mail.